like to introduce Philip Ammerman, who is a collaborator of the Center for Entrepreneurship. He's been with us for some time now, and he's also one of the judges from the Cyprus Entrepreneurship competition. Some of you who are interested to apply next year. Today, Philip kindly will introduce you, present to you the digital Utopia.
And Dystopia. So, good afternoon and welcome. My name is Philip Ammerman. I'm someone who originally started out in consulting, adapted to technology back in 1995. Today, I own an integrated organization which includes consulting, digital marketing, business incubation, and angel investments. We invest in about one startup a year. We made this commitment back in 2010, and we've extended it to 2030. The startups are typically in the software as a service space, and typically in a B2B sector where we can contribute something more than just cash. So our cash investments are relatively small, anywhere from 20,000 euro to maybe 150,000 euro. But where we can really help is with our professional contacts, our networks of clients, primarily outside Cyprus, access to other funding organizations, and so on and so forth. The subject of my talk today is Digital Utopia, Digital Dystopia. And in it, I want to take a look at the rise of technology and what this means for ordinary citizens, as well as enterprises, startups, and just about everyone. And this is something that I have a great deal of interest in because for me and for a lot of my clients, it helps us track which way technology and commerce are going, and therefore it helps us kind of begin to prepare, or hopefully prepare, for what we feel is coming around the bend. So this isn't one of those very technical seminars. You don't need to take notes. Try to stay awake. Just sit back and clear your mind, and let's try to take about an hour and discuss a little bit about the future together, and the future reflected also in what we see today. So as a consulting firm and as an individual, we have a simple thesis. We believe that the way technology is going today, in the future, and that means even today, people are going to prefer to live online. Now, you're probably saying, what does that mean? Am I going to port my consciousness into a Dropbox file somewhere? No, obviously not. But it does mean that the technology is progressing so quickly that already now, but certainly more in the future, if you are plugged into the virtual world, or if you're plugged into the metaverse, it's going to be very difficult to discern the difference between reality and the digital world, between the metaverse and reality. And you're going to see a lot of trends associated with this, the main trend of which is that the majority of our transactions in pretty much every sector are going to migrate online. And by transactions, I mean everyday transactions like banking or e-commerce, but also with the rise of artificial intelligence, with the rise of big data, with the rise of Internet of Things, everything you're doing now to pull things towards you will be pushed towards you automatically. So your quality of life, or hopefully for many of us, the quality of life is going to increase. We can stop having to deal with a lot of basic things. We can start trying to deal with some of the more qualitative things that concern us. But of course, as with every rise of technology, there are going to be winners and losers. And given the fact that as a system, as a polity, whether we're in Cyprus, whether in Greece, whether in the United States today, we can barely handle some of the most basic and easy issues say like homelessness or public housing, issues like carbon dioxide emissions, issues like the environment. Given the fact that we cannot seem to handle these in a time of peace, it's difficult to see how we're going to handle them in a time of very, very rapid technological and economic change. So this is why I have this title, Digital Utopia, because technology is really going to enable us to live very utopian lives. But also digital dystopia, because the benefits of this world will be restricted, probably based on income, just as we see they are today, and also based on the state of technological development that we see in any case. We talk about the north-south divide. That is going to become a lot more prevalent even within a specific country. And in my opinion, and from the trends that I'm tracking and the companies I'm working with, these trends are actually occurring very, very quickly. So we're now in 2022. A lot of these changes are going to be visible by 2030 and onwards. And by 2040, I think they're basically going to define what our existence is. In other words, by 2040, we're going to have to opt out of some of these issues because otherwise they're going to be prevalent. They will be the standard feature. Now, why is this taking place? Why do I have such an extreme view of things? Well, first of all, we've already seen the impact of technological change on most economic industries, right? Banking, tourism, e-commerce, all of these things were migrated online and are occurring online long before the COVID lockdowns took place. And I think the COVID lockdowns in many ways accelerated this trend because it forced a lot of people for the first time to try to consider an alternative form of life, a form of life where you didn't have the freedom to go outside. So you were dependent on this tiny tether of a data link and all of the services that were on the other side of that data link, whether they were digital services like digital banking or whether they were physical service delivery like grocery delivery, getting a taxi, getting medical help, and so on and so forth. But it's pretty clear that a lot of these sectors have already transformed. Hello. It's also clear that when you spend your life in an environment dominated by screens, the quality of the technology that you're looking at is eventually going to rival and overtake the quality perception that you have of the human eyeball. The human eyeball has not evolved that much over the past few tens of thousands of years, but I estimate it's going to start evolving quite a bit more quickly precisely because we're spending more and more time in an environment of artificial lighting and then eventually in a virtual reality environment where, again, the quality of what you're seeing in front of you is going to be a lot more intense and a lot more possibly realistic than what you see when you walk out the door, basically. And that's only going to accelerate. So right now, virtual reality is really just at the emergence of the technological evolution curve. There's about 3 companies that are manufacturing the goggles needed for a mass audience. Apple has been working on this for over 6 years now. Every time Apple does its product conference in September, I start getting all excited. I'm like, maybe they will announce, maybe they will announce. They never announce. But Apple is working on 2 models, and the key problem that Apple faces, just as the key problem that everyone else faces, is that the batteries are simply too heavy. So if you have an Oculus headset from Meta, from Facebook, you know that in order to keep that on your head for a long period of time, you need to be able to support it in various ways. Apple has tried to solve that on the one hand by keeping an external battery pack, which would plug onto your belt. That is one of the 2 versions that they're looking at. The other one is a super miniaturized space-age technology set of goggles. But I believe that if Apple launches, and if they do it successfully, then they're going to transform the sector just like the iPhone transformed the smartphone sector. And once we get into this area, we are increasingly getting into massive changes in terms of haptic feedback, in terms of hand-eye coordination, in terms of not just gaming and entertainment, but think of all of the economic areas that have not yet adapted to virtual reality or augmented reality. Think of the tourism sector. It's the largest economic sector in the world. And yet if you go to the average website today and you look at a hotel website, what do you see? You see 2-dimensional photos, probably taken 3 or 4 years ago. In a few cases, you see a few videos, basically. Well, imagine if you could do a real high-quality VR tour through a hotel, or through a car that you're thinking of buying, or through a restaurant, or something like that. The way that we're going to interact with service providers is really, really going to change, very rapidly. Is it mine? Sorry. I thought it was off. Pardon me. And the fourth and last reason is because, frankly, we are addicted to technology. This started with social media. You know that every time you get a like, that produces a tiny little dopamine rush. And you know, if you go to bed without getting enough likes, you probably feel a little bit depressed, or you're wondering what's going on, or what's wrong with me, or God knows what else. But there's more and more research showing that social media is addictive, that we're spending more and more time on the screen. We're reliant on our smartphones for more and more features, more and more functions every day. And for many people, this is an addiction. I mean, I don't know if you've tried not to use a smartphone for a day. This weekend, if you like, do an experiment. Hide your smartphone on Friday night and see if you can get through Saturday without it. And maybe we can even do a competition and see how many hours we can each last. I don't think I'll last more than 2 hours, basically.
Or how many will be depressed.
Or how many will be depressed, yeah. Yeah. But, I mean, yeah, well, not everyone can sleep for 24 hours. But I mean, the fact is that we're dependent on this, right? We are tethered to our entire community. We're tethered to our sense of self-identity. And again, I think this is only going to increase based on how we see all of the trends taking place in the workforce and in society today. The corollary is then also true. If you have the benefit of having experienced a transformed digital environment, whenever you're in contact with an environment which isn't transformed, you tend to feel a little bit bad. Or you tend to feel a little bit disturbed, or you tend at least to maybe be pushed a little bit out of your comfort zone. Now, I'm not talking about going to nightclubs with your friends. That's something different. I'm not talking about going to a concert where, that whole social effect is part of the experience. It's a driver of the experience. But I am talking about basic routine interactions. When's the last time you've gone to a bank and stood in line? The last time I went was about 4 years ago, and it was such a painful existence, I resolved that I never want to do that again. When's the last time you've been to a post office or the supermarket, and you stand in line and you're like, there've got to be 50 ways that this could be done more productively, and that I could be using my time more productively. Now, this is a fundamental social capitalism, social transaction which has been at the basis of our society for thousands of years. And yet the fact that we are now so used in such a brief period of time to do things online, it means that this kind of transaction is increasingly going to be eliminated, we hope. If there are meaningful or value-added, transactions, these will continue, and they may form the basis of new business models. But in general, when I'm going to be a little bit brutal here. In general, when our grandparents pass away, a lot of the things that we're taking for granted now, in terms of this physical interaction, are probably also going to pass with them. So, for example, if you go into a pharmacy today, who do you see? You see little old ladies or little old men who are not at the pharmacy because they have to be at the pharmacy. They're there because they want to be at the pharmacy, because they can discuss with the pharmacist all the aches and pains they have. So that's still a deeply social interaction, right? There's a lot of social capital which derives from this interaction. For you and me, this is a foreign interaction. We don't need to tell our medical problems to the pharmacist. We're living in a different world. So again, there's a huge generational impact here. There's obviously also a huge, there are issues of economies of scale. Some things you can deliver, other things you can't deliver. But in general, the trend is really going in one direction. How many of you have ordered something on Foodie and then you've got to explain to the bloody driver where to go? Yeah, I mean, isn't that irritating? I mean, I hate it. That's the worst part of the transaction, basically. Besides the fact that I overeat and get heavier. Okay? How many of you have been to a travel agent? You guys are all really young. Have you ever been to a travel agent in your life? Okay. When I was your age, we could only go to travel agents, right? And so you would go to a travel agent, and then you would wait in line, and then they could see you, and you'd say, I need a ticket to Athens. And then, the questions and answers would start. What day? Well, maybe on Sunday. Okay, but we don't have enough flights, so the tickets are too expensive. How about Monday? I've got a flight Monday morning. What time Monday morning? 5 in the morning. No, I don't want 5 in the morning. And like, if you go online today, you book the ticket in about 5 minutes. If you go to a travel agent today, you book the ticket in about 30 minutes. It's a deeply irritating encounter. It casts in really clear relief how far we've digitized and how far we now expect seamless, virtual, rapid, and accurate service with a lot of choice. So this digital world is not only a net positive. That's why, again, I'm talking about a utopia plus a dystopia. There's lots of negative impacts that come from living in a purely digital world, at least as we're living in it now. One of these is that people can increasingly no longer read. And if you're learning a complex Renaissance language like Greek or German or Italian or French, you know that this is a very complex language, even though we've streamed it down and we've gotten away with a lot of tonus and perispomenes and all kinds of crazy grammar artifacts. But it's still very, very complicated. And when you learn to scan for information and get your information from the screen, that is a very different learning process and processing process than reading off a page and reading, taking your time to have to read and enjoy the written word. So a lot of people today have difficulty writing. My son used to be a top gamer before he had to start working and take a few things a little bit more seriously. And my son was so fast in gaming that very often the gaming platform would throttle him because they thought that he was cheating in some way. So in terms of hand-eye coordination in gaming, he's one of the top. He was one of the top-ranked people in the games that he was doing. But in terms of learning French or Greek or German, he had a lot of trouble because his brain just didn't work slowly enough to learn the language, or conversely, the language wasn't being taught fast enough to keep up with how fast you guys are today. Right? So again, if we think just about the educational sector, we can kind of start to understand how deeply things will need to change coming into the future. But just as people cannot analyze complex structures and sentences, it also turns out that they don't want to. Right? Research after research shows that who do we trust today, or who do we listen to today? It's people that we think we can trust. Now, we're not actually analyzing what they say. We're not actually trying to balance or research or understand what they say. But it's how they say it, and whether this sounds good enough, whether it sounds reasonable enough, that's what tends to count for a lot more. And this is my friend Donald. This ecosystem, and I'm not blaming Donald at all, he's a symptom, he's not a driver, although we can argue about that. This is a symptom of a much deeper set of causal factors, that when you're getting all of your information off social media, and you're getting all of the information off a circle of friends who are already exercising a set of values and acting as a filter to what you get, then your own perspective tends to narrow, and the circle of trust which you get also tends to narrow. And because of this, society is re-becoming a tribal society. Right? I mean, who do we listen to online? It's the strong and the loud people. Who did our Neolithic ancestors listen to? It was the strong and the loud people. There's the mastodon, let's kill him. It's very much a return of this type of human psychology and society. And guys, I don't see this going away. If you look at the tremendous role this digital media and social media play in our lives today, it's only becoming more intense. It's not becoming less intense. For a while there, I was hopeful that people were going off Facebook. It turned out they were simply going to Instagram and TikTok. And then, who knows what the next platform is going to be. And then finally, we know this biologically. We know this in terms of scientific research. Prolonged exposure to social media can lead to depression, anxiety, melancholy, self-doubt, and all of the negative impacts which can be magnified on social media, like bullying, can increasingly then lead to things like suicide or self-harm or other negative outcomes. Again, I'm not saying that this affects everyone, right? What I'm saying is that this digital universe that we're building for ourselves is not only a net positive, it has a lot of net negative elements to it. Now, I'm hoping you guys have seen The Matrix. I know it was a long time ago. It was in 1999, which, that makes me even older than you can imagine. But what we feared about in The Matrix was a series whereby artificial intelligence had taken over the world, and the only thing that humans were needed for were the electricity produced by their biology, by their brains, basically. And so in The Matrix, humans were plugged into a metaverse, and they interacted in the metaverse so that AI could harvest electricity and then maintain control over a very grim Earth. And The Matrix became a metaphor for a lot of people on how society is moving, on the role of big governments, the deep states, unchecked corporate interests, and so on and so forth. And I mean, I'm one of these people. I believe that our society has changed quite a bit. But for me, The Matrix is really this here. This is the reality of The Matrix. The reality is not that we're plugged into, we haven't yet become slaves, although I'm sure we can debate this. But we have become so heavily plugged in to the internet and to the digital world that, you've probably seen this. You've probably gone out to dinner and you've seen a family where the two kids are on a smartphone or a tablet, and the two parents every so often will be on that as well. And even though we're physically proximate to each other, we're all interacting on two levels. We're interacting with each other, and then more and more we're interacting with our friends, with social media, with everything else that occurs online. And again, this leads back to my title, Digital Utopia, Digital Dystopia. There are positive and negative aspects to this. So Karl Marx, yes, please.
I have a question about that, with the matrix so big.
Yeah.
And so if we take it sequentially, you have cryptocurrency, NFTs, Web3, and then the actual metaverse, and we're waiting for it in the next following years, most probably. So you were connecting the matrix, the metaverse, and the government. You said that in a sentence. So I would like to have your opinion on the law enforcement about the so-called Web3 and metaverse. So who's going to be in control? Is it about government, or is it going to be like the blockchain of cryptocurrency?
That's a great question.
What is your actual opinion?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I don't know the answer. If I had to make a bet, I would say that just like we have some FBI task forces now, or out there trying to stop some type of criminal activity, or out there on the dark web, for example, I imagine that we're probably going to go into that type of environment, because I think the central issue really is, will there be a single metaverse, or is it going to be a multiverse? If you look at Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg, he's trying to build a monopoly. He's trying to build a single metaverse. And that is very much the tech business model that's prevalent till now, right? Google is a monopoly on search. Facebook is a monopoly on social. You have another couple of monopolies out there which are kind of coalescing or forming. But I'm not sure in the future who's going to actually be running everything in terms of public versus private. If I have to bet, I'm going to assume it's going to be largely private. And I'm going to assume that a lot of these tools, depending on how they pan out, are going to be, imagine you have a municipal council and you have a private police force, that type of thing.
I think that most governments would follow Singapore structure, because they're trying to actually make a multiverse, simulating the whole society thingy about their country, which is, it makes the most sense, but at the same time it doesn't. So there's no correct answer to it.
But in Singapore, the thing is, and this comes really back to the Matrix and this brave new
Exactly.
world that we're building, Singapore is, if you will permit me, an authoritarian government. There are elections, there's a democratic process, but day to day is very authoritarian. And the problem is, in a lot of our societies, we simply cannot carry that off. We're not able to do that, if it's a solution. I'm not even sure it's a solution.
Time will show.
Great question, though. Really great question. So, 100+ years ago, Karl Marx came out with the saying, religion is the opium of the masses. And, today I really believe that this emerging technological area is the opium of the masses in a way. I'm not saying we're all going to get stoned, but I am saying that for a lot of us, the attractions of the metaverse and the virtual world are going to be far, far greater than the actual physical world that we live in. Part of this will be by choice, part of it will be by design, but it's just something that we have to deal with. And what's your name? Like Haralambo said, I don't know who's actually going to be the decision maker, and I can't actually discern, even in the Cypriot government, say, or the Greek government, or the US government, I cannot discern that there's a government power actually strong enough to solve this issue, or even to address it properly. Now, if we talk a little bit about authoritarianism and the role of the state, China is taking a little bit of a different path. So China has introduced a so-called, first of all, they've introduced what is arguably the world's first mass surveillance state. So the level of observation through various data sensors or data points of citizens and companies is huge. And that is now taking form in the form of something called social credit systems. Now, I've seen very different interpretations of where this is going and what's actually being carried out now. But if you do want to look at this, and if you want to read up a little bit about it, I've included some sources here. The presentation will be posted in any case, so you'll have access to all the slides and everything else. But do take a look at that. And if some of you are in the IT field or in sociology, whatever, I think this is a great idea for a bachelor's thesis, a master's thesis, a PhD thesis. There's a lot of work that we in the West need to do to understand what the system is all about. So, if you're interested in this, it could turn into something very interesting from the research viewpoint. I want to look at some interrelated strands. Yeah, please.
About the previous slide.
Yeah.
Is it the system that they're gonna put? They'll basically be rating everyone, and there won't be any cash, let's say, and it will be depend on their rating, the things that they'll be able to purchase and things the house they're gonna be able to stay in and stuff.
Quite possible. Let me tell you what it is now. It's right now a method of penalties and also rewards. So imagine if you get a parking ticket and you don't pay the parking ticket. The fact that you've gotten the parking ticket is a negative. The fact that you haven't paid it is a further negative. And this probably goes into your job file. I imagine there's a lot of Chinese employers who are using this data to verify employment. At the same time, and again, I'm not absolutely confident about what I'm going to say, it's just some of the stuff that I've read. For instance, if you give part of your salary to some form of charity which is approved by the state, that is a positive. So you know how we all have like individual credit scores in the United States? If you've paid loans, if you've taken loans, if you pay the credit card on time, think of this as a social score, a social credit score, basically. We don't have it in Cyprus yet, but
What if you don't have the money to give to the charity?
yeah, well, that's why inequality keeps rising. I'm afraid. It's in the United States that the system of financing public education at the state level in most states is through property taxes. So if you're in a very rich neighborhood, you have very good schools because the property is expensive, tax revenue is collected on that and is funneled into public education. If you live in a bad neighborhood, you're probably going to have very bad schools, right? It's like a system which is kind of baked in to deliver inequality. There are exceptions. There's federal funding. There's a lot of exceptions to it. But in general, the system as a system leaves a lot to be desired. Please.
The system you just mentioned is applied in China?
No, United States. I was just throwing out an example of the United States.
No, not about the credit score, before
Fine.
social credit.
Social credit is only in China right now, as far as I know, yeah. But please, again, if anyone wants to publish articles, research, I would love to read it. I think this is something really important that we need to understand more about. So let's look at some 4 different strands: entertainment, labor, data, and medicine. Let's start out with entertainment. I grew up in Greece in the 1970s, and I remember going to my first movie. It was an outdoor movie on some island. It was in black and white, and it was about World War II, and the Greeks won, of course. Today, entertainment is a lot more sophisticated, obviously, right? Entertainment is on demand. We have multiple options for it. We can choose to pay or to pirate. We can choose to be a passive viewer, like you log into Netflix and you chill out, or you can be, it can be gaming, or it can be various other forms of entertainment. But for me, what's interesting when I look at how entertainment is moving is that, at least if we look at the gaming environment, a lot of these games are becoming much more attractive to people than real life. Yeah, I mean, not only the quality of the graphics, not only the role playing, not only the values expressed in a lot of these environments, but again, you add to that the whole adrenaline rush. You add to that, the addiction properties of gaming, and we're really in an area where the game is really about you or your friends, and how you act with your friends. And again, this is really different from how things used to be 20 or 30 years ago. 20 or 30 years ago, you would be in a game and you would play by the rules, and roughly everyone would be the same. Today, if you're rich and you're in one of these games, you can buy some add-ons, and that makes you even more powerful or even more faster. You get better weapons or stronger cars or whatever. And I at least am really wondering, how far this trend is going to go. But I think this trend is going to influence every other trend that we're looking at. We're also going to go from an environment where you are focused on the screen to an environment where you are in a much more immersive environment. So that's going to kind of cut people off even more. And when we start looking at all of the different technologies that emerge out of this, we're looking at a very new definition of the future. Right? Artificial intelligence today has probably, it probably has its greatest expression in the gaming environment. Virtual and augmented reality, the same thing. Haptic feedback is still limited, but I fully expect that we're going to see some innovations coming down the line which are going to change as well, how we interact with the game and what type of feedback we get. It won't only be visual and oral, but it will increasingly be based on the sense of touch and on other areas. And all of this is then going to gradually make its way outside the gaming environment, right? So we're going to have applications in national security, data censoring, data fusion, big data, trend analysis, and so on and so forth. We also know that this is addictive. Again, there's been a lot of research which has been carried out here, and I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but a lot of governments are now thinking about how they can start regulating the gaming environment. So the British government has tried to actually set some standards to avoid addiction in gaming. Now, I believe these are going to fail. I think this is as strong as crack cocaine, and I don't mean that in a bad way, okay? But I believe that when you can test your limit in a fully immersive environment, which is creative, which is, where you are the master of your destiny, I think that's something which a lot of people today don't have to the same extent in the real world. And, I don't think we can outlaw it, and I don't think we should even try to outlaw it. Yeah.
It's just wrong officializing esports and then calling it an addiction. Doesn't make sense. It's like calling an addiction going on around in the 21st century logic at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, but remember, it's different people commenting from different perspectives. So the people who are concerned about addiction, I mean, they're really concerned. It's not that they're making it up.
Yeah, it exists, but the average Generation Z person won't really accept it.
Yeah.
Because his best argument would be, okay, I'm watching my favorite game played on TV, like my father's watching football, and then I'm being called an addict. Why is not a footballer being called an addict?
Yeah.
This is not valid.
Sure. or people who drink the 1 liter Coca-Cola things.
Yeah, and it's the same thing.
Yeah, but I also think, if you want to make young people rebel against something and do even more of what they shouldn't be doing, the best thing you could do is make it illegal.
Yeah, true.
Do I have a solution? No, I don't. It's easy for me to say this, but I don't have a solution. This is a thing. I don't know how far it's going to get. I also believe, though, that our educational system today is failing because of the rapid advances in technology. Our educational system is still largely set to the tune of the idea in the late 1800s that European nation states were unifying geographically, therefore they had to make citizens. They had to teach citizens about history, about economy, about sometimes religion, and so on and so forth. And our educational system is very much deeply rooted in the idea of making an active citizen who is part of a nation state. The problem is the way we deliver that is totally unsuited to the rate at which we are absorbing digital information today. Let's take a few basic examples. Let's take the schedule of a school. In the United States, the schedules are 9 in the morning to about 3:30 in the afternoon. And why is that? It's essentially so that parents can drop their kids off and then go work, right? And it's no coincidence that the average school day is between 7 or 8 hours and the average working shift is 7 or 8 hours. Okay, take the average class. The average class is about an hour, of which about 45 minutes are considered the actual teaching hour. I mean, are we still going to stick with the hourly, schedule when, probably your brain is working in 5-minute increments. 5 minutes might already be too long for the brain in terms of how rapidly it can process information through other means. You take it how we educate, how we recruit and retain teachers and educate teachers in the public school system. It is a system which is deeply rooted in the practices of 50 or 60 years ago. And how are we going to have teachers who are teaching when sometimes the students might know more than the teachers? Right? These are all questions which, as a society at the national level of educational standards, we're still asking a lot of questions. We're not changing a lot. There are a lot of barriers to change. But, in Cyprus, I did a couple of educational digital projects in schools, and I was shocked to learn that even in private schools, teacher salaries are something like 800 to 900 euro per month. That's nothing. And, all of these people are basically waiting until a position in the public sector opens up, because they can then join the public sector where the salaries are 3 or 4 times higher. And the working hours are a little bit less. But I mean, we can't possibly, as a society, survive this transition with this type of educational system, right? I mean, it's simply not going to work. We're going to fall further and further behind the times, and we're going to make more and more mistakes. And the transitions that we're eventually going to go through are going to be a lot harder because we're really not prepared for them. Again, do I have an answer? No. I know that we're going to need to change a lot of things. I know we're going to need to spend a lot of money. But I also know that as a system, we're not even looking in that direction. And this is really what I worry about most of all. Let's look at labored robotics. I believe that in most advanced economies, by 2030 at minimum, something like 50% of most traditional professions, or at least most traditional work, will have been replaced by heavily automated, heavily intelligent systems. I'm a consultant, and every month I have to file my expenses with my accountant, and I love to, my accountant is a great person, but I love to point out the accountant is one of the examples of one of the least efficient professions in the world. If I want something from the accountant, I have to send them an email and ask them, like, what is my VAT statement or whatever. That disrupts their workflow. The head accountant sends an email off to the junior accountant, and they start scurrying around to dig up information. It's then sent back to the chief accountant. It's then sent back to me. And then, of course, I'll have 2 other questions based on that one answer, right? And we kind of go round and round. Well, we already have accounting systems which are intelligent. We already have banking systems in the United States where your accounting system can pull all of the expenditure and income from out of the banking software and reconcile the bank account automatically for you. In the EU, we've committed to allowing this within the next couple of years. And by 2030, I believe that if we take the profession of accountants, 90% of what they do will have been fully replaced, and it will be done better by software. Better, faster, more accurately. You take lawyers, right? You know that today in China, there's already intelligent AI agents. There's screens, basically, terminals, where if you want legal advice, you just go up to the screen and you type in what you're looking for, and this agent starts giving you legal information. There have been tests already which show that if in an average court case, depending on the type of legal precedents you're looking for, AI already does better than legal teams. So, imagine where this is going. At some time in the future, if we have a contractual dispute, our first port of call is going to be an AI. We're going to press the button, and it's going to give us a legal decision based on precedents in about 30 seconds. And it's only if we disagree with that we will then escalate it to, a full legal procedure, basically. So this is the type of stuff which is, coming down the track. The technology is already there. Our adaptation of it and our laws are holding us back. But this is where we're going. You mentioned earlier Elon Musk's Android. Again, I think if Tesla manages to commercialize this Android, and if it's friendly enough, he's going to do again what Apple did for the iPhone. He's going to blow open a massive range of applications which are going to transform how we live. My mother's 81 years old. I would love to have an Android looking after her than the system I have now, where either I have to call her and see how she is, or we hire someone that we don't know if we can trust, and then that person gets married and goes somewhere else, So the technology is going to solve a lot of problems, and the question is, are we going to be able to keep up with it? I don't know if you've seen this video on YouTube. This is really funny. This is Boston Dynamics. It's one of the leading robotics firms. It was just bought by someone, but I don't remember who. Check this out. They've got dancing robots, which are kind of funny. If you've seen this was during the COVID in Japan. Japan basically told everyone to stay at home, but they still had the baseball teams playing. Baseball is an obsession in Japan. And so the stadium seats would be a little less bare. They packed them with robots who were dancing and waving flags. Weird. I mean, look at it, it's weird. But, it makes a certain amount of anthropological sense. McDonald's. Why is McDonald's so efficient? Because they focus on ergonomy and productivity. And, if you look at the future, that's definitely going to be one of the main industries which is going to move robotics to the next step, to massive human labor replacement. If you've been to McDonald's, say, in France or in London, right, you've seen that you no longer take an order, right, at the counter. You have a flat screen, you pick what you want, you feed in your Visa card, and you pay, and then you wait for it to be delivered. This experiment has already started. This is robotic driverless delivery. This is a Chinese drone, which is a military speedboat, basically, and it can be used for anti-submarine warfare, for extending a radar picket line, for doing a lot of things that right now are done by human-crewed boats. You remember the war in Azerbaijan, or between Azerbaijan and Armenia last year, where the Turkish drones played such a big role. And you've probably seen that, just as 10 years ago, IBM's Big Blue was beating the human chess grandmasters. Now Google is beating the Go champions. So, imagine what this is going to do. The barriers to entry that we have right now for robots are only partly technical. There's a lot of the pricing point is a barrier because the components need to be manufactured at scale. Language and voice recognition need to be improved. AI needs to be improved. But the scale of the experimentation and trials which are going on are massive. And I fully expect that in the future, a lot of things that we're doing now are going to be done by robots. And one of these is wars. Wars will be fought by robots. or at least robot-human teams. And the question then is, who wins, and how do we even understand if we've won or lost? Health. Health is major. It's something that we tend to ignore. But again, the scientific advances which are being made are absolutely massive. We have now started to manipulate the genetic code, not just to understand the risk liability of diseases, but we can now actually implement genetic therapies through code manipulation. And I fully believe that, just as we have 3D printed products, we're going to eventually have 3D printed organs, we're going to have implants. If you're a diabetic and we cannot somehow solve diabetes, you will have an implant which will be doing all of your insulin shots and monitoring your insulin in real time. And there's just going to be a range of things like this. But the main thing which I see taking place is that the human lifespan is going to expand dramatically, at least for the very wealthy and the very well off. And I would not at all be surprised to see if 150 years was actually at the lower end of expectations that we can have in the future for our human life. So we're already using gene therapy now on things like cancer, on things like replacing missing or defective genes, on healing tissue, and so on and so forth. And in the future, this is just going to expand dramatically. BioNTech, right, that German company which is set up by a Turkish couple, which became famous during COVID, their main area of research is not COVID. Their main area of research is DNA adjustments, essentially, using the DNA code and the messenger RNA to actually to get better outcomes based on genetic healing, genetic therapies. We have a technology now called CRISPR, which has lowered the cost of genetic assays and increased the time frame dramatically. What used to require years of work and millions of dollars can now be done in a question of hours. A Chinese scientist has actually gone forward with the first genetic editing of babies, of fetuses, something which is theoretically illegal. But as with AI, who is going to actually block it? The pressure eventually to enter this field is going to be massive. We're going to go from wearables to implants. You probably saw before COVID there was this crazy article that a certain number of people in Sweden are now getting RFID implants to open doors. Like, that's a challenge, opening the door. I never... Yeah, anyway. So this area is really, really going to grow. There's a lot of role now also in the brain, the brain organ and the brain operation interface, the synapse. This is one of the main companies. The other main company is another Elon Musk company, where Elon has actually invested here. He's not the main guy behind it. The company is called Neuralink, and basically they're experimenting with wiring up the brains of pigs and other ruminants and seeing if they can control biological activity based on that.
Can I ask something about it?
Yeah, please.
They're doing this now, experiments on animals, but after that, are you going to try to implement this in, let's say, in hospitals and for, like, if someone cannot move his hands and, yeah, right? And after that, certain. What about entertainment?
I'm almost certain.
What do you think about entertainment after that?
What to say? I mean, it's some of the worst impulses of human creativity and some of the best, and we will see both. That's who we are. We are both the best of ourselves and the worst of ourselves, unfortunately. That's it. So by 2040, one vision is that we have a utopia, and this is what I call the Star Trek future. In Star Trek, everything is clean, everything is ordered. There's a clear hierarchy. Humanity has banded together. There's no more racism. We're now one humanity, one planet against space, right? We've succeeded to band together. So we will expand the human lifespan. I'm confident of that. Of course, I also believe that the primary winners of this will be the rich or people who live in a very egalitarian country, as long as funding is made available for this. We will cure diseases, we will have better crops, better means of raising crops. By the way, what happens next month in terms of population? Does anyone know? We're hitting another record. We're hitting 8 billion people on our planet in November of 2022. Absolute historic record. We'll have robots, we'll have technology, hopefully human labor can become more rewarding, hopefully. This is one vision, right? It's a vision that is to some extent reflected in some science fiction, although not a lot of it. And I think it's that positive vision that we have in institutions like the university here, which do care about society, they do care about educating people, they do care about a sustainable balance of knowledge, education, work, the environment, and so on and so forth. But I think it's almost assured that we will also have dystopia. And for me, this is the Blade Runner future. And you might have seen the first Blade Runner, which came out in the 1980s. You might have seen the most recent update. But here, essentially, we're taking the world we live in and we extend it into the future. So we live in a beautiful world, but it's an imperfect world, and our society is very imperfect. In the future, the gains of technology and knowledge and patents will probably be held by a few very well-funded, very large enterprises, or by a few very nimble ones like BioNTech, which make a real, valid innovation. I believe at least 50% of our current workforce is going to be replaced. Yeah.
Well, the first point is both inevitable and not necessarily bad, because then who's going to control it? It connects to my question. Because it's either that or what? I mean, what else could anyone suggest? So this is not good but not bad either. It's just the fact that we don't know how to react. This is my personal opinion about it.
I forget who it is. I think of all people, it's Sacha Baron Cohen, the comedian who played Borat.
Right.
Did you see that speech that he made? He made a brilliant speech about the power held by a number of unelected oligarchs. But yeah, again, there's good and bad in this, but certainly it can be improved. I think we all agree it can be improved. I think governments right now are already unable to mediate in terms of inequality. They are unable to manage a normal process of economic growth which takes place in peacetime, in prosperity. And I believe that the rich are not only going to go richer, but the fact that they will have access to the fundamental architecture of DNA, it means that, the role of these dynasties is going to become a lot more powerful. You know that in Greece, we have a prime minister who is now the third in his family history to be prime minister, essentially. Andreas Papandreou was the same thing a while back. So, I mean, we have political dynasties, we have oligarchical dynasties, and I think this is kind of an inevitable outcome of where we're going. So there's a lot of questions around this, right? The technology is moving faster than we can possibly predict and I think possibly control. And the question is, what are we going to do about it as citizens, as researchers, as innovators, as investors, as scholars, as mothers, fathers, children, and so on and so forth. The social credit system is definitely one option for a solution if it's tied to things like, universal basic income. And then the question there is going to be, what is the moral hazard involved? Are we going, by offering people, say, universal basic income, are we going to make them even lazier, right? Is there a moral hazard in getting people off this horrible treadmill of obsolescence, and allowing them to live a better life? This is a huge debate. And again, I don't have an answer. We don't have enough data to even look at this. The universal consensus economically has been that government should be relatively restricted, that economies should be open, that people should have the ability to advance. But again, if you look at economic history, say from 1989 onwards, it's not a pretty history. Government expenditure has grown in Greece, Cyprus, United States, pretty much every country. Outcomes in many respects are falling. We still have poverty, we still have inequality, we still have a lot of problems, and we have a lot of debt. And so the question is, is government fit for purpose? Is the idea of regulation and the idea of, what the core tasks that government is doing now, is it good enough, and how does it need to change given how technology is changing? Can we afford UBI? Can we afford a technology market where a few big oligarchs buy any sign of threat to their existing monopolistic platforms? You look at Apple, Alphabet, Meta, right? They're spending literally billions every year buying up patents and buying up small startups, which in some cases threaten their existing franchise. Our whole pension systems, which by the way are also growing into deficit and growing in terms of the debt resources they require, our pension systems are based on a ratio of employees to retirees of about 8 to 2 or 8 to 1, and they're based on a lifespan after retirement of about 20 years. Well, what happens if the average lifespan after retirement increases to 90 or 100 years? And what happens if the number of people in employment falls to about 2 or 3 people? The system is technically bankrupt, and we don't at this stage have a good solution for this. How do we handle things like fake news? Can we realistically censor everything? When is censorship politically motivated? When isn't it? What are the limits to free speech? These are age-old problems, right? These problems have been around since Socrates and before, and we still don't have an answer for them, but the urgency of the problem, I think, is getting a lot more important. What happens if, wars are no longer fought by humans? Who wins? Well, the country with the biggest industrial production chain, or the country that can afford to buy the products of that industrial production chain. So again, you look at Greece right now. Greece is rearming like crazy. We're spending billions on defense because of Turkey. And yet our national debt right now is higher than it was when the Greek financial crisis started in 2010. How is this going to be resolved? Right? We don't have a solution. And so on and so on. So there's a lot of questions here. But I really encourage you to think about how fast technology is changing. I know you're all relatively young, but I grew up in the decade of the 1970s and the 1980s in Greece. Of course, we had no internet. TV was liberalized in the early 1980s. The world really changed since then. And because we didn't have the technology, we didn't need the solutions back then. Today, we urgently need the solutions. We have, again, incredible progress, but that progress is creating, to some extent, as many problems as it is solving. And I'm not saying we should stop progress. There's no way we can do that. But again, as citizens, as educated people, as students, we do need to think about which way we're going. Along the way, there's going to be tremendous opportunities, both in terms of your research, your work, your innovation, investments to be made. And this is all coming relatively fast. It's 2022. I'm talking about things which will be standard by 2035 or 2040. That is really not that long into the future. So thank you very much. I'm open to any questions, and if you guys want to continue the conversation, my email address is on the slides, and you're very welcome to reach out.